Greetings and salutations. It's your man CD, the fallen angel Christopher Daniels. And I'm out here in the Southern California sunshine, making my way through this quarantine like everyone else. Hopefully you're all home, safe, and healthy. I want to do a quick shout out to Carl and Anthony, who are the leaders of the A2theK WrestleTalk Podcast. You guys can watch that on YouTube, listen to it on Spotify, etc., etc. And I just want to say I appreciate their support. The guys at AEW, we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for fans like you guys. And I'm sure Carl and Anthony feel the same way about all of you that listen to A2theK WrestleTalk. So keep listening to A2theK WrestleTalk. You guys stay home, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you later.
Right, then we'll move on to our segment 3 for this week, which is our dream bookings. I think it's probably the best title for it. So both Carl and I agreed earlier this week that we would each list 5, as we do in our typical fashion. We'd each list 5, and this week it's going to be for matches or bookings we'd like to see. So this can be any sort of thing, you know, dead or alive, any promotion, whatever, just something you would have liked to have seen that you've either never seen or, you know, that you'd like to see happen in the future, maybe anything like that. So you're all right if I kick off, Carl?
Yeah.
Awesome. So the first one I want to list, and this is sort of what sort of brought the segment up for me, because I was intrigued by it and I thought that would be a good booking. Now, are you familiar with Tama Tonga?
Yes.
Good. For those of you who aren't familiar with Tama Tonga, because both Carl and I admittedly don't really follow New Japan, don't really follow the indies, so it's an odd one for me to bring up. But he's a fella that I've been looking at recently because I saw an interview with him in which they were interviewing him about how life works for New Japan. There's a lot of touring, it's a different lifestyle out there, and I believe this was with Cultaholic, I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the major YouTube channels for wrestling. So it got me intrigued by him. Now, he's very big in New Japan at the moment. He currently wrestles with his brother, who, apologies, his name escapes me. Partners of, they are Guerrillas of Destiny, I believe that the tag team is, the GOD. And they are basically, Tama Tonga he's not strictly the son of Haku, but he is his adopted son. Haku is actually his uncle, but the family lineage and all that, he's actually Haku's adopted son. Now, Haku's a bit before my time, but Carl, you'll remember him quite well, I imagine.
Oh yeah, I remember him as Haku, as Meng, as various different pseudonyms.
So this is for me, this has got me looking into the family a little bit as well, because Haku apparently is probably one of the toughest bastards going in wrestling. There's many a story about him. He's a very interesting fella. Me and Carl have talked about doing like a history of series, which he may end up being one of them, because he is a fascinating guy. We've heard things about like he got maced in the face by the police and didn't flinch, just totally no-sold, an actual mace to the face and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
He's bit off a fella's nose. Eric Bischoff has publicly said that he stayed in WWE way past his WCW way past his time because no one had the balls to sack him. He's just a legend for many reasons, but he's made some appearances in New Japan with Tama Tonga. So they have a bit of a family connection. I don't think they're literally related, but it's part of this whole thing where they're all like blood brothers or whatever, but they are connected to Roman Reigns and the Anoa'i family as well. So what I'd like to see, my first booking, and sorry I took a bit of a long time to get there, but it's because I think it's, as far as our podcast goes, he's not a well-known name. What I'd like to see is for Roman to ultimately go forward with whatever feud he goes with, comes back, takes on Braun, takes on whoever, and gets the title scene, and then ultimately wins the title and embraces whatever reaction he gets. I imagine, given the current status of Roman Reigns, that it would be a negative one. And I want him to embrace that negative reaction, go with it, be a heel, whatever, right? But the reason I want that is because I would like to see, as a dream booking for me, Tama Tonga to sort of join WWE and to go straight into a heavy feud with Roman Reigns. And I want Haku there as well, because he's the notable name anyway. So he can push it, he can motivate this, he can push Tama Tonga as the beast that he is. There's been subtle nods again, if you look around on YouTube, and that Tama Tonga sort of admittedly just lightheartedly joked at Roman Reigns' little fist pump thing as he's coming down the ring and stuff. So you could easily play on this whole sort of family feud sort of thing. And I just think it'd be a great way of getting Roman over, but it'd certainly be a great way of pushing Tama Tonga as a massive star in the WWE if he were to ever do it. So that, for me, that's my first one. I'd love to see Tama Tonga versus Roman Reigns for the it doesn't necessarily have to be for the title, but in that sort of picture in WWE.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any opinions on that, Carl?
No, I mean, I think it'd be a nice little build. Obviously, they've got the lineage. I think they'd square up quite nicely against each other.
The only thing, the only negative for me on it is that he's basically like, he to me, he's a bit like Roman Reigns if Roman Reigns had charisma. So probably not the best for Roman, because I think it'd really push that sort of thing of going, he's not that good on the mic, is he, Roman? But even so, I think I'd love to see him turn up in WWE, just because he's someone who I think I'd be a fan of, but I can't include New Japan as well. I just can't. Yeah. So that's my first one. So the next one I wanted to throw back to our Rumble talk, Carl, because what I'd like to see is for Keith Lee to have his, and I want this to be this recent, so this is relevant to right now. I want Keith Lee to go over Damian Priest. I want him to win. I want him to sort of look badass. I want him to point out that he is exactly what he says he is. He's unstoppable, etc. And then I want Roman Reigns again. Yeah, I want Brock Lesnar's music to hit. And I want Brock to turn up on NXT, because fuck it, why not? Main roster people to turn up on NXT anyway. And I want him to go after Keith Lee for the North American title. What I don't want is for Brock to win, but I do want to see that feud. How do you feel about that one, Carl? Do you have any opinions on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think we said during the Royal Rumble, I think you were very big on the potential of this. I think you suggested it all the way back then as something you'd want to see, and I think it would be pretty cool. These guys are both like huge monsters, aren't they? So it'd be very much like two monsters squaring off would be quite good.
Yeah. Well, we pointed out in the past, bro, Brock Lesnar is he's big on pushing people when they deserve it. Like we saw him with Drew, he was all for that. And I don't think he'd have any issue pushing the Limitless one. I really don't. So I think it'd be a great bout to see. It might even only have to be one match, to be fair. But I wanted to see some payoff to that sort of brief interaction there at the Rumble. So I've had to include it in this now as well. That I'd like to see, but I'd like to see it. I'd like to see Keith Lee take the win with Damian Priest and retain his title, and then off the back of that memento, saying, "See, here's the Limitless one." That's when I want it to happen. I need it to be at that precise moment. I think that'd be a great booking. Probably very unlikely. I don't know where Brock is these days. I think he's having a lot of time off now. But if I could have it, that's exactly what I'd have.
Interesting.
My next one. This one is a bit of a cheat, I'll be honest, Carl, because this was something that was booked that just sadly never happened, but I needed to mention it because, and again, I think I've mentioned it in the past, but I just wanted to mention the match that never happened, being Sting versus The Undertaker. And, as far as dream booking goes, when they were both in the prime, please. But sadly, this is one I mentioned. I have an affinity for Sting because when I started watching wrestling, I started with WCW, and it was when Sting was sort of full crow, as it were. And that was the cool thing that made me go, wow, this looks cool. This, and obviously Undertaker is my favorite wrestler, so I've always wanted to see this bout anyway. And we got Sting versus Triple H, but we never managed to get Sting Undertaker. Sadly, because out of necessity, Sting wasn't able to.
Would you want to see American Badass Taker or Deadman Taker?
Well, for me personally, and this might be, I'm a bit up and down, to be honest, because American Badass Taker is the Taker I started with. So purely from a nostalgic point of view, I'd probably want American Badass Taker. But then when you go for the gimmicks gelling together, it'd make more sense to be the Deadman. The Deadman versus Full Crow Sting would be the more logical. They both have that similar thing. Sting has that crow music and then suddenly appears and stuff like that. So it has that similar sort of, beyond kind of thing. So it probably makes more sense to be the Deadman. But again, I still like the American Badass as much as he's probably not the most popular version of Taker. Just it gets me right in the old nostalgia, that one.
We could always do American Badass Taker versus Beach Sting before he was the Crow. Old school, like
let's have both.
Face paint Sting.
We'll have that match, and then we'll have Deadman versus Crow Sting. Okay, we'll have them all. A little bit of a cheat, that one, because it's not something I've come up with. It was a match that was meant to happen that we sadly never got. My next one. Now, this one, I'd love to see these two, but there's no capacity in which we could logically see it, because I'd like to see Chris Jericho play off against Drew McIntyre, because Jericho is an absolute legend, and we've seen what he can do. We've seen him elevate people. We've seen him go against CM Punk and all sorts, and really elevate them when they were on their run, when they were on their rise. And I think it'd be fantastic to see him and Drew. But I'd never want to see Jericho at this point in time back in the WWE. I think he's perfectly suited in AEW. He's got more creative freedom in AEW. Similarly, I wouldn't like to see Drew end up in AEW. Not for anything, AEW is a great company, but Drew's the top of WWE at the minute, so there's no logical way of getting the two together in my head that I'd be happy with, because I don't want to see Jericho turn back up in WWE just yet. But I'd love to see those two in terms of a feud, in terms of a booking. I have no real sort of difficulty or preference of how this is done, but when you see the creative elements of Jericho, and if he's given that creative freedom, the potential's endless. He could play off Drew's original sort of exit from the WWE and his early years and that sort of thing. Could even mock the 3MB and stuff like that. You know what I mean? There's so many potentials for the way they could play off against each other in a comical way and in a very serious way. And we've seen lately with Drew that he's got that sort of bit of banter about him now as well. He's definitely improved on the mic. So for me, those two, I think, would be a fantastic one to see booked at some point. Sadly, again, it'd be a difficult one in my head to reconcile, because I like them both in the promotions they're in. Yeah. Was that be something you'd like to see?
I think it's something I've never even thought of before. It's mad now, because I think back to when Jericho was in WWE and Drew McIntyre was there for the first time. I feel like, I don't know whether Drew, I mean, obviously he's not, but I don't know whether it would have been better when Drew wasn't as big.
Yeah, I take your point on that.
Do you know what I mean?
I look at it where some of the best bits of recent Jericho in WWE have been dealing with people who were on the rise, which I know obviously Drew is the champion at the moment, but he's still on the rise. Do you know what I mean? And I've seen it with Owens was a well-known name and he was on the rise, and then his sort of friendship and subsequent feud with Jericho was some of the best work I've seen. Again, CM Punk was on the rise when Jericho sort of went into that feud with him.
I think he'd do a good job of elevating Drew. I think it's a good point that you make. He does have the ability to take someone and really kind of get them over in new and different ways. So I think it's just one I'd never considered before. So I'd definitely be interested.
And then the last one for me, this is a bit of you might not agree with this one. And this is based on a theory, I suppose, of that. I think the New Day, given more creative freedom, have a lot more about them. And for that reason, not specific booking as these people feuding with these people, I would like to see the New Day in AEW. I'd like to see them with more creative freedom. I'd like to see them in a much more stable tag division, a much more interesting tag division, and that's what I see with AEW at the minute. And straight off the bat, I'd say, given the comedic elements of both teams, I'd quite happily see them feud with the Young Bucks for a bit. You could see them any number. I mean, all right, certain ones wouldn't work too well, like the Butcher and the Blade, that sort of thing. But I think I'd be intrigued to see the New Day with a bit more creative freedom. And they, don't be wrong, they've certainly had more creative freedom than most, but everyone is still held down by the scripting and the rules of WWE. So given the way a lot of people, when they've left the WWE, have been able to sort of almost enjoy themselves, looking at Moxley and Jericho and all that, for me, the last one it's not a specific booking per se, but I'm intrigued to see whether we could get more out of the New Day. I think they've plateaued really in recent years as far as bookings go and as far as the creativity of their characters go. And I'd be intrigued to see whether that is a true plateau, or whether they with given more freedom, they could do something a bit more fresh and a bit more fun with it. Because I actually think the New Day are a really good, you could have to call them a faction, I suppose, because there's three of them in it. But I think there's more there, and I think they wouldn't get that in WWE.
Yeah, interesting. I guess I've never even thought of them being outside of WWE. To be fair,
To be honest, sadly, I don't think you ever would see. I think they're the type of people that they'll be there forever. Or they'll retire, obviously, but they're sort of brand loyal in that sense. I don't think they're made in the shade, aren't they? You know, they've got their Xavier Woods has got his YouTube sideline. They've now got the New Days podcast as well. So even outside of the ring, they're made with WWE. So I can't see them ever leaving. But it'd be interesting to see, given more freedom, what they would do or what they could do. So that was my last one.
Nice.
Indeed. So, would you like to go for yours, Cal?
Yeah, so my ones, I don't think there's any that could, I mean, there's maybe one or two that could still take place today, but a lot of these are like fantasy booking type things. But kicking off with one of my kind of favorite wrestlers of all time, Bret Hart, I would have liked to see him take on Kurt Angle. So for me, you know, this would have been, as a true fan of technical wrestling, this would have been incredible from a technical standpoint. I think both of these just had like unbelievable amount of wrestling ability, but also they were both fantastic on the mic. Now, you know, Kurt Angle, we're quite familiar with all his promos he's cut in the past, and you know, he can be hilarious and comedic, but he can be like really you know, just compelling as well. Whereas I think, you know, Bret gets a lot of shit for his ability on the mic. A lot of people think that he couldn't talk, but really, I just think he's really underappreciated. I don't think it was within his character to do things that were too kind of silly or, you know, stuff like that. So people didn't really think he had that much range, but I've always thought he's done a fantastic job of, you know, getting segments over and storylines over. And, you know, to a degree, he was responsible for the Attitude Era. He was the first one to push Vince McMahon and say this is bullshit and stuff like that on the mic before Austin got involved. So, you know, he was a bit of a trailblazer in that regard. But
right,
I can just see
so
these
it's more just he's always sort of kept to the character he's got rather than not having the sort of skills.
Yeah, so I think like you know the build up would be gold. The match itself is like a spectacle. Technical ability, you know, through the roof. But then, you know, if you wanted to market it like you had spear versus spear, you know, you've got sharpshooter versus ankle lock as well.
Well, yeah, to be fair, both notable submission holds. The ankle lock to me always looks weak. Kurt did a good job of putting that over as a move. I've never seen anyone else do it where it actually looks like convincing. But Kurt was always really good with it, to be fair. But I'd watch that, to be fair, mate. I don't know Bret anywhere near as well as you do. He's slightly before my time. Absolutely love Kurt. I think he's an absolute legend. Notably, his feuds with Brock Lesnar and John Cena back in the day were both brilliant. But yeah, I'd be on board for that. And like you say, from a technical standpoint, they're both fantastic wrestlers. Or Bret certainly was. So yeah, I totally get that. That's a solid first book on that.
Yeah, to be honest, of all five, that one's probably my biggest dream match, I would say. That I'm obviously very disappointed we never got to see. But then next on my list, I had another one of my favorites, Mr. Perfect, versus Eddie Guerrero. So my kind of logic behind this one, again, both fantastically gifted in the ring, but kind of they were both dirty players, weren't they? So if you think about it, you know, Eddie was lying and cheating and stealing, doing everything he can to get by. And Mr. Perfect was very much the same in his early days. You know, he'd distract you, throw his towel in your face, and you know, low blow you, slap you, and you know, he was always kind of a dirty kind of guy. But again, he was always a fantastic, like whiny sort of heel. I think he would have meshed quite well with Eddie as the kind of lovable kind of prankster face, if you will. You know, so I just think that for me, you know, to my knowledge, they've never faced off before, but that would have been fireworks.
But yeah, that would have been fantastic one to see. Like you say, from a comical standpoint, I think I don't know Mr. Perfect too well. I know you mentioned some stuff in the past where, like, going into that Perfect gimmick, he'd do stuff that were quite amusing.
Throw
a football down the field and then go and catch it and stuff like that. So he's obviously quite willing to do a bit of the comedic stuff. And we all know from Eddie Guerrero when he was doing his Viva La Raza phase with Chavo and that. You know, that was some of his most humorous stuff. So I think that'd certainly be a great one to see from a comedic standpoint and from a wrestling standpoint as well, to be fair.
Yeah, definitely something that would have been incredible. I think, especially when it was the later WWE Eddie years. Do you know what I mean? And like Mr. Perfect from like 90, 91 kind of era where he was like on top of his game would have been fantastic. And the next one, Chris Jericho makes an appearance in my list as well.
Naturally, it wouldn't be a list without Jericho.
Well, exactly. You could even say the list of Jericho.
You could.
But yeah, so for me, Jericho versus Roddy Piper. So I just think from a promo standpoint, like, holy shit. Both of these guys were some of the finest talkers you'll ever see. Jericho still today, some of his promos are amazing, but Roddy Piper for me is the best talker ever. So
that's the thing. I mean, bear in mind, I came into it after Piper's main sort of stay, as it were. Obviously, he came back. I've mentioned this before, but I was around when he came back and was managing Sean O'Haire. But for me, like, you always go back and you see the classics with Roddy, like the coconut thing and all that. Do you know what I mean? And like you say, he's always been fantastic on the mic. Even in his later years, when he did come back to the WWE, he was still fantastic on the mic. And I think we've always both said enough about Jericho. We know exactly what Jericho's like on the mic, and they're both. I don't want to be unfair to Piper. He is out of my era. I won't disagree with your statement that he's the best talker in the biz. I genuinely would give that title to Chris Jericho, funnily enough. But it's definitely one of these two.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So I think that just goes to show, like, imagine the build of this match. Do you know what I mean? It would be everything you could ever want from a build. It would be hilarious. It would be like gripping. That it would just be everything you could ever kind of hope for. And Piper was no slouch in the ring either. I don't think he was as technically gifted as Jericho.
No.
But all his matches were still really, really good, and he was very gifted in that regard too. So I think this would have been money, especially from a build standpoint. It would have been gold.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, Jericho is he could wrestle anyone. He could pick a random guy off the street and he'd probably still sell me on that fucking match. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, 100%.
But solid one that. Yeah.
Then my second to last one. So this is kind of crazy to think they haven't really faced off before, but Brock Lesnar versus Batista.
Yeah, do you know, I was surprised actually when I read this in the notes, because do you know when you feel like that is something that should have happened, like it should have happened so much that I'm like, am I sure that didn't happen? Like, I know I've not seen it, but did that definitely not happen? And you're right, it hasn't happened.
Crazy.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Batista kind of came in as Brock was leaving his first time in WWE, right?
Yeah, they kind of just missed.
Sadly, I think when Brock was still there, he was doing his Deacon Batista stuff with Devon, sadly, I think.
Yeah.
Rather than being booked as the monster with Evolution. Lost it for a second. I forgot who they were.
Well, that's it. They both came up through the ranks at like a similar time. They're both part of the Ruthless Aggression era. I believe they had one match. It was in OVW. I don't know if any footage exists of it. But obviously it would have been when Brock was part of the Minnesota Stretching Crew, and Batista was probably playing as like a Leviathan gimmick, where he was like a vampire or whatever. So
before he got reformed and found the church, yeah.
Well, of course, as most vampires do. But yeah, I just think it's crazy that this never happened. They were two of the biggest stars from the Ruthless Aggression era. It's probably Vince's wet dream when you think about it. Two big, muscly men, kind of that stature, main event stars.
Oh yeah, that's definitely the type of thing he'd love. But
and it's one of them, and I don't mean any disrespect to like Jericho or Piper or Guerrero Perfect or anything like that, but Lesnar Batista, you see that and you see it as a WrestleMania main event as well.
Well, that's the thing. They could book that now, and they know it's going to be big money. They wouldn't even have to build up. They could just go, these two are facing off at Mania, and that'd be big money. People would want to see it.
Well, that's it. It'd have similar vibes as like Hogan Warrior when that happened, or more recently Rock and Cena. It's
Rock and Cena didn't. Like, to be fair, they both put a bit of work in, but Rock and Cena didn't need to. They didn't need to build that booking at all. It was just like two different eras clashing. We're not seeing it. We want to see it.
Yeah.
Obviously, in this case, it's not two different eras, but I'm surprised we've not seen it before. But you're right, we genuinely haven't. I didn't know about the OVW match, but I've never seen them on the main roster.
Well, you're potentially going to get even more surprised, because the last match I've got on my list is a match that's never happened, which is The Rock and Shawn Michaels. I've no idea how these guys have never faced off.
Like, they've been in the Yeah, they've been in the game at the same time. How have they never faced off? That's unreal.
Like literally, I mean, fair dues. Sean was kind of coming to the end of his initial stint before he had the back problems in like 97, 98. And that's when The Rock was kind of breaking away from his Rocky Maivia stuff and kind of going into the Nation, things like that. So
Right.
I think their kind of paths were slightly askew, but
Do you think that's what it is? Do you think they've both been victims of timing? Because like when Sean had his sort of second coming, it was when The Rock was full Hollywood, I suppose, at that point.
yeah, I think it's probably timing more than anything. But that being said, there was times when they were both there together, so it could have happened. Do you know what I mean? It was it's like I found out recently that The Rock and Bret Hart actually did have a match. So you can find that on YouTube. It's obviously when The Rock was his Rocky Maivia gimmick, but crazy to think that The Rock and Bret Hart, which would have been a dream match of mine, actually has happened. Fair dues, not when The Rock was a big star, but
I think that's when you have to like adapt dream match, because you could go, well, your dream match is there, Carl, go and watch it, but it's
well,
not.
exactly.
It's not The Rock, it's Rocky Maivia, so it's slightly different. You'd want to see like the Rock, the People's Champ versus Bret Hart, wouldn't you? To be fair.
Yeah, and I think like similar to what we were saying before about Drew and Jericho, I feel like if it would have been The Rock, built like a brick shit house like he is today with muscles everywhere versus Shawn Michaels, it wouldn't have been as compelling to me. I think this should have been when Rock was a lot leaner, kind of.
Are you thinking the Nation, or are you thinking People's Champ?
No, I'm thinking People's Champ, but I'm thinking like not super early on, but like not late either, like in the middle of that run. I feel like that would have sounds stupid to say it would have elevated him because he's The Rock, but he was.
So you're thinking around the time he like before he's gone against Triple H and that side of things, or sort of after he's had a few bouts with Triple H, because they had some long-standing feuds, didn't they?
Yeah, so I'd say probably before he got into the later bulk of his feuds. I mentioned he'd had like a couple in the IC picture with him, but then they stayed apart for quite a bit after that. So probably the point in between there would have been the money. But yeah, just crazy because obviously The Rock is fantastic on the mic. Sean's always held his own. They're both amazing in ring performers. And Shawn Michaels is Mr. WrestleMania, so WrestleMania is where this should have happened. Really.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
So yeah, that is my 5. It makes me sad to think I'll never get to see these, but yeah, they're my dream ones.
And for those listening, this is what I mean when I say that Carl is the authority on wrestling knowledge, because that they are 5 fucking brilliant bookings right there, and uncompared. You look back into the history of it really well, and it's stuff I couldn't come up with, mates. And I sincerely appreciate these lists because I find them educational as well. It's brilliant.
It's fun and educational.
Right, so that is A2theK's WrestleTalk for this week. So as always, guys, you can find us on most all social medias. We are TikTok famous. Christopher Daniels will totally agree with that. You can also find us on YouTube. We are trying to push the YouTube a little bit more now. So if you could jump on there, give us a like, give us a subscribe, that would be massively helpful. Where else are we, Carl? We're everywhere. We're
everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, we're there.
You name it. And as always, obviously, we do host a podcast on. We use Anchor FM. So if anyone wants to check out Anchor for hosting their own little show, or just check us out on there, that's fine. But we are on pretty much anywhere you find your podcasts. We're on all the mainstays, on Apple, Spotify. We're on Google, a few others. We're on TuneIn. You can ask Alexa to play us. That works as well. We're literally any means in which you can find us, we're there, and any support is always appreciated. And that is it from us. We will see you all next week.
Have a good one.